Alright, Sam, let's get started.
I wanted to ask you how you got involved with organizing specifically to change the name of Ryerson, which is now being referred to as X University until they decide to take action.
I got involved with organizing because I had heard about the task force, which I did not know until a little bit later in the year, to be honest. And I believe that they came together because of the actions of Black Lives Matter individuals who had artistically protested and created a piece around the paint on the statue and making folks listen and be accountable to what this person did. And then the task force was kind of like a call and answer to that. And the president of the university handpicked folks. When those folks have been in these rooms listening to all these stories, for as much as I have been vocal about the systemic mechanism of the task force, there are also people in there that I care a lot about. I know that they have contracts where they can't share information with us, so it's like they've been built into this system where they can't be transparent with their own community members. So my response and my activism came by way of learning about the task force. Then I started to reach out and just be like, what can we do about this? I started first in a way towards the Indigenous Students Association. I'm like, we need to respond to this. Are we going to respond to this? Going through the mechanism of the task force itself and doing these community consultations and this terrible survey, or are we going to do something else? And then kind of jumping from point to point to point to person and getting in contact with different professors of mine who I had been with in the past and was like, can Yellowhead help us? What do we do? I don't even see the Indigenous student voices being present. X came together because it was members of Yellowhead and other members in CZEX being like, do not go through the formal mechanisms. This is not going to help you at all. We want to help. Having really strong networks of people in those regards and students as well. We started to formulate ideas around actions, around calls, around the open letter, which we first started with. Of course, we heard the news of the children, which just really elevated the conversation in a way that was really terrifying because it was like all of a sudden everyone was paying attention because of the number. When in fact we know that years and years ago, we've found bodies before. It's just that number hasn't been elevated to public consciousness. Organization really happened as a result of not seeing myself in the process, not seeing other Indigenous voices in the process, not knowing what was happening, and making sure that they knew there was a huge opposition on the other side as to how this was being done and also what needs to happen at this point in time. This ask is not just from me, and I am not the only organizer. I do not do this alone. I am not in a silo. I do this with community, always in consultation. It's always done from a community perspective. I think that when you are a person who is deeply impacted by any space of identity that you're constantly having to reassert or code switch or do things within the space of yourself to accommodate others, and especially in the spaces of whiteness and professionalism or in school settings or etc., it's like we're fractured people. We become fractured because colonialism is an extremely fracturing experience. So is whiteness, so is racism. But when we fracture each other like that, it's like one part of myself decides to come forward and then the other part of myself has to kind of sneak in instead of it being intersectional. Sometimes I feel like I'm never taken up as a whole person. It's moment by moment people are taking me up in different spaces in different rooms, so it's what part of myself is really wanting to come forward and answer this question or not answer this question at this time. There's been some really effective and important conversations that people just want to start educating themselves at this point in time, and it's been shocking in a way and also quite moving, also very confusing because all of this information has been here through various documents, government mechanisms, committees, reports, because that really white dominant perspective of what information do you have for me and how can I take it from you? When you feel like you're approached like that, you have to shut that down immediately. It's that capitalistic colonial mentality of I take, I am entitled, I deserve because I am here, because my family, quote unquote, worked hard to be here. Whatever those narratives are that hold people up where they think that they can take up space in another person's life to ask those invasive questions and not really come into contact with themselves before they do that is what's really challenging, and that's where the emotional labor happens most of the time, and that's where a lot of the unpacking has to happen for them. The problem with this is that as soon as you promote and they see anger on you as a racialized person, as someone who takes up an identity that is not appropriate for the white, hegemonic, religious, male, dominant perspective, you become an antithesis to that. And it is that really binary relationship where then you're like, if I do take up the space of anger, which is like sometimes it's necessary, absolutely. But other times where you're like, let's just not engage. Either we interact with kindness, which is really what I've been trying to promote when I've been on the ground, or I'm not doing this with you. And you have more work to do.
What would you say to people who want to take action? Maybe they don't know where to start. Maybe they don't have the education, whatever the case. What do you recommend that they do?
I think that I'm a huge advocate coming out of this mentality of social work that I believe that we have to start with ourselves first. We have to start with our social location, and then we have to go into our subject position in certain regards. And really, really, really have to do some education around that and like what motivates you to take up action. Because if folks do want to take up action, I want to make sure that they're doing it from a place of consciousness and praxis, taking those theories that we've provided. You know, communities across time and space who are racialized, who are feminists, who are folks who have been through different movements. I am here. My education is in me. I have this bundle because of communities of color, because of feminists, because of folks who were actively creating theories to oppose these dominant white narratives, and I benefit from that every single day. In terms of the work, placing yourself within a history, we need to look at the sources of epistemic violence, and I say that from my professor McLeod, who I deeply learned a lot about myself and unpacking myself around, who's a Black woman and a contract professor at our university and an incredible person. I learned from those people who were my teachers. I did not necessarily learn as a result of the institution. I learned because of individual teachers. So what I think that we can do for folks who do want to help or do want to start unpacking is that make sure that you're first working on yourself and learning, like, why do I want to help? Is this coming out of a white savior complex? Is this coming from a place of like, where is the help coming from? Do I need to help to feel better about myself? Or is the help to benefit others? Do I need to be congratulated for that help? Because that's like a huge thing too. It's like your ego really works in mysterious ways when you're doing this work. And those are the places that I think we need to unpack those archetypes of help first, and then start to move into the space of, let's just educate. Let's just start to educate first. Self-education is really important. You have to be careful when you do your research, but also I believe that people are innately able to do that. There's so many great resources in terms of leaders who are Indigenous giving that information out into the world. And then I think, like, for me, I'm a huge person who is an advocate for grassroots organizations of just looking after your home space and your neighbors first, and then thinking about that in a more international capacity later, and making sure that when you're helping, you're taking up the right space. We don't need any more white saviors. Those traditions are what caused a lot of the problems centering around the residential schools to begin with. Those are the problems that continue to cause harm to racialized folks and communities across this land. You really, really, really need to dig deeper and also see that this is not a personal attack. This is a systemic attack that is now privileging you. And then, you know, I really do believe put your money where your mouth is. If you have even some funds that can go to mutual aid in and around the city, it's a collaboration of time where we're asking people to come together and start to realize that these are points of convergence. These aren't separate issues.
As the last thing, as an energy healer, are there any practices that you would like to walk people watching this through?
I think that for myself, especially in this environment and in this work, we learn through our lifetimes not how to breathe as well, and breath being one of those sources of life. I think that taking time with yourself and just expanding your lungs from your lower diaphragm and really breathing in a different way and counting and breathing out is really something that's always been very important and beneficial for me. It engages you back into your parasympathetic nervous system, and this is something that you can do for yourself that does not cost anything. Our breath also regulates so many different things in our bodies. Because we internalize so many narratives of shame, coming back to self and being kind is really important. And find your community. Find people you feel safe with. People are medicine.
For anyone watching this, you can find community with us as a starting place. Thank you so much, Sam. I really hope that people internalize what you've said.
Thank you so much. Make much, Marcy.